Welcome to another episode of Inside Athletic Training. Today, we're joined by Jamie Reed, the Senior Director of Medical Operations for the Texas Rangers. On today's show, Jamie discusses the recently released Major League Baseball report on pitcher injuries, a comprehensive study published in December of 2024. Jamie will break down the key findings, explore his implications for player health, and share more insights from the athletic trainer's perspective. Enjoy the show. All right, Jamie, welcome back to the Inside Athletic Training Podcast. Super excited to have you on for the second time, this time for episode number 83. Last time we spoke, you shared some really interesting insight into the youth arm health crisis facing young players across the country. Very excited to have you on today to talk about the recently released MLB report on pitchers' injuries, which we'll get into shortly here. But for those out there who don't know you, aren't familiar with your career, let's start by letting you share a little bit about your journey into athletic training and kind of what inspired you to get into baseball.
Sure. Thanks, Sam, and thanks for having me on. I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, and a good friend of mine, his dad was the head athletic trainer at the United States Naval Academy. And when I was in school, I thought I was going to go the medical route, and just it's so competitive, and I love sports so much that I kind of put those two together and was able to lean on my friend's dad, Red Romo, and really became intrigued with athletic training. And so I went down to East Carolina, which back in the mid and late 70s had a really good program, and got hired right out of college by the Baltimore Orioles. And here I am now getting ready to start my 44th year in Major League Baseball.
Mm-hmm. And I know there's been a ton of awesome stuff you've accomplished throughout your career. A couple years ago, finally getting that elusive World Series ring with the Rangers. Talk about what that meant for you after such a long, successful career in the game to finally, climb that mountain with the Rangers.
I think it was obviously super exciting, but it was more exciting for me to watch our fan base and our front office and our scouts who worked so hard to put that team together. That was really brought me the greatest satisfaction. And honestly, on a personal note, my grandkids got way into the postseason that year.
Sure.
And way into the World Series. And they've all become huge baseball fans because of that season. So it was really great. I don't think it defined my professional career, but it was sure, a nice crowning moment to have it. And I've got a ridiculously large World Series ring now that it's hard to wear anywhere outside of the house, but it's certainly, I guess, a professional achievement that I'm certainly proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that don't know you, I don't think we'd see flaunting a World Series ring around Dallas anytime soon. But awesome to have that in the office or to show everybody in the family. Well, Jamie, last time you were on the show, we talked a lot about the youth arm health issues and kind of a crisis, as some would say, with elbow injuries. And you gave a ton of cool data about how things have changed over the past 2 decades with youth arm health. Major League Baseball recently released a report on pitcher injuries. They interviewed and gathered data from more than 200 industry experts, including athletic trainers, team physicians, player development experts, coaches, and even former pitchers. I want to dive into the report with you, someone who's so knowledgeable on this topic. To start, so there's a broad consensus among the 200 experts that 3 key things are kind of leading to these injuries. 1, chasing max effort velocity during training sessions. 2, max effort pitching in games. And 3, just chasing better stuff, as people in baseball would call it. What's your overall take on those 3 main drivers of pitcher arm injuries?
Well, those 3 drivers are what allow a player to get drafted high and make more money. And so the motivation certainly, for me, still goes back to amateur baseball. And, chasing velocity, year-round training, year-round baseball, and then the secondary stuff, which is, a slider, curveball, or changeup. So there was a time when, the secondary stuff was just to get guys off of their fastball. And now, the percentage of fastballs thrown in Major League Baseball has gone down considerably. And the percentage of stuff, off-speed pitches, has gone up. So I think it all ties for me still back into, amateur baseball and the damage that's done, whether it's youth baseball, high school baseball, at some levels, college baseball. It's certainly documented in this study. And John D'Angelo and his group did a fantastic job at MLB pulling this all together. And it allows us in the medical community in baseball to validate what we've been telling ownership and general managers and scouts and pitching coaches and managers that, hey, velo certainly plays big in baseball, in pitching and getting outs, but there's a flip side to it, and the enhanced risk is very real. And we've kind of felt that for a while, but John D'Angelo and his group allow us to really kind of showcase that a little bit more. And one of the things that really stood out for me, and as you know, I've been a big proponent of protecting youth baseball players and pitchers specifically, is that in the last 15 years, the Tommy John rate, which is the elbow reconstruction, in Major League Baseball has doubled. But in minor league baseball, and these are amateur kids that are coming into professional baseball, it's more than tripled. And I think that's a very real and telling number for me.
Yeah, and you talked about the fastball not being primary, and the off speed and changing speeds used to be just to get guys out and things like that. And when you take a look at the study, the average velocity by pitch type, you see a massive difference over the years. For example, from 2008 to 2024, average fastball velo has gone up from 91 to 94, and changeup and curveball velocity, as noted in the study, has increased by even more than that, almost 5 miles an hour since 2008. Do you think that just the stress on the arm that causes, simple as that, is a huge reason for these injuries? And also, like you said, well, what emphasis do those, draft experts, scouts, and you guys place on, quote unquote stuff for these pitchers?
Yeah, I think, actually the most telling thing for me in that part of the study, Sam, was that the velocity specific to a pitch that went up the most was the changeup. Yep. And there was a time where changeup was just meant to disrupt timing of a hitter. Mm-hmm. So it looked like a fastball until it wasn't a fastball. And it got to the plate, 5 feet slower than a fastball would on the same timing mechanism. And that was effective. But now guys are overthrowing these changeups. I have a couple pitchers, but just watching baseball in general in 24 this past season, that, pitchers are throwing 97 to 99, 100 miles an hour, throwing a 91, 92 mile an hour changeup. And that was never the intent of it. Changeup and a curveball especially were meant to kind of allow the pitcher just to slow things down. And it was less stress because you didn't throw it as hard. And now it's a maximum effort pitch. As far as the impact on baseball, I've been in the draft room for the last 11 or 12 years, and I'm always pushing guys who haven't been hurt and have a great changeup. I sat next to a lot of great hitters during my many years in the Major League Baseball dugout, and they all complained about, this guy's got a changeup. I'm just not seeing. I can't hit it. I'm way out in front of it. But I would preach that in the draft room with the scouts, and then the kids who were in there doing the analytics showed me, and the difference between a fastball that's thrown 98 miles an hour and a fastball that throws 92 miles an hour is about 60% on a batting average. So it's very real. And I understand why scouts are chasing it, and I understand why scouting directors are chasing it, and general managers and pitching coaches, because the velo works. The problem is, again, at a detriment to typically the elbow, but sometimes the shoulder also.
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly there, like you said at the beginning, one of the main drivers here is draftability, projectability, and that stuff's important. It's always going to be in the game. So it's tough to avoid there when guys do have, new options, new, better training to kind of start their career and break in. Well, Jamie, I know a few years ago, unrelated to this study, not totally, but, substances were banned that used to help pitchers grip the baseball better and improve spin rate and stuff overall. I know there's been some studies out there. The Phillies guys did some stuff there, and we had them on the podcast to discuss. But do you think grip issues and a lack of substances being used to grip the baseball has also kind of led to some of these injuries?
There's no question in my mind. And I had a very veteran pitcher, very well-documented pitcher, Cy Young Award winner with us with the Rangers this year. And he doesn't feel like it's spin rate that makes the difference. It's the ability to control the baseball. And if you can control the baseball, then you're more effective as a pitcher. And he's adamant, and so is our head team physician, Dr. Keith Meister, who's a leading expert in shoulder and elbow injuries in baseball, that the grip, well, you can just imagine if you picked up a tacky apple, you're not going to drop it.
Sure.
You're not going to drop
Yeah.
it. As you eat it, you're going to eat around that pine tar. But if you
Yep.
pick up, a recently waxed baseball or apple, it's more likely to slip out of your hand. And that's essentially what it is. And so what you end up doing with a baseball you don't trust the grip with is gripping it tighter. And where does that create, more force? In the elbow, in the flexor tendon, in the pronator tendon, which is kind of a protector of the ulnar collateral ligament. So it certainly makes sense that taking the tackiness away from baseball, which has been in the game forever, has really, I think, led to a lot of the elbow injuries. And the guys have had to change their grip a little bit. Besides being tighter, they'll change the position of the seams in their hands because of it. So I don't think there's any doubt that it's contributed to injuries.
Hmm. And you mentioned there that you had a star player, Cy Young Award winner, people in the Rangers organization mentioning, the issues with lack of grip on the baseball. Along the lines of those star pitchers, Spencer Strider, a couple other guys, experience elbow injuries, miss an entire season. And that's kind of shed more light and awareness on this issue. Do you think the more star pitchers that do, have UCL injuries, Tommy John miss an entire year, the more guys that go out that way really kind of push Major League Baseball, guys like you, athletic trainers, to pay more attention to this, or does it more just shine light on it for the public in general?
I think it was probably 10 or 12 years ago. There was a big article in USA Today, I think it was in, or maybe Sports Illustrated, about the epidemic of elbow injuries in
Yep.
baseball. And it was when Steven Strasburg and a couple, big pitchers, big name pitchers went down with the ulnar collateral ligament tear and ultimately had Tommy John elbow reconstruction. And, we've certainly watched it for a while, but the numbers just keep going up, unbelievably going up, exponentially going up. Twice as many major league pitchers have it now than they did 15 years ago. 3 times as many minor league players have it than they did, 15 years ago. And they didn't really, look at amateur baseball, but I can tell you, after looking at 500 medicals on amateur pitchers, the number of amateur Tommy Johns has gone up, I would say, tenfold in the last 15 or 20 years. So it's a real thing that we've looked at, because, if you look at the business side of baseball, you're losing a player for 14 or 15 months, yet he's getting that much closer to 40-man protection, a year of non-development. He's getting 1 year closer to arbitration or free agency if he's on a major league roster. So on the business side, it has a very great economical impact, and it does to the pitchers too, because coming back from a TJ, there's a little bit of an unknown, and a lot of guys take a year after they're healthy to kind of get their stuff back. So it's got a huge impact financially on both the business and the player side.
Mm-hmm. And another interesting note that I want to touch on here in the report, as you guys get ready for spring training coming up here in just a couple of weeks, is the kind of the timing of these pitchers' injuries. In recent years, pitcher injuries have declined, or not declined, but steadied in the regular season, which is great news. But the report notes that the major chunk of these injuries have occurred in spring training and the early months in the season. Do you think a major reason for this is off-season training, chasing velocity, max effort training, compared to how guys used to get ready for the season?
No question. And these guys are training at home, and they're typically, paying money, big money in some instances, to go to a pitching seminar, not a seminar, but a warehouse. And these pitchers are getting bigger and stronger, and they're working on the velocity. And I think the guys are toning down maybe the long toss, which I think is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly they're doing more weighted ball type exercises, and they're certainly chasing velocity. And then, when you're not around the professional pitching coaches and all the analytical folks that come along with it, who are analyzing pitch velocity and movement, all those things that show up in spring training, I think you feel like in January that you're ready for spring training, but in reality, you may not be ready for spring training. And then you kind of ramp up even quicker than you should. And we try to keep, we put velo and analytics on every pitch that's thrown in spring training, whether it's a bullpen, our rehabs and long toss programs. but the jump is real. We try to monitor it, but the jump is real when guys start to catch up to the rest of the group, or feel like they're behind, or the analytics say they're behind. But two, they also start seeing hitters in different uniforms in spring training games, and that's when you're reaching back. You're trying to make a team, and you're reaching back for that little bit more, and that's when I think a lot of these things come to fruition as far as injuries, especially elbow injuries, but shoulder also. The other thing too is that a lot of guys just kind of ride through the end of a season, August or September, and their elbows sore, but they're not really saying anything. They just figure it's the end of the season, and this could be the beginning of a ligament injury that typically don't heal real well. And now, if you're ramping up your training, by the time you hit that last little foot on the gas pedal in spring training games, the ligament's just not ready for it. Their flexor tendon is just not ready or prepared for it because of damage from previous year or years. And I think that's why, I've always felt this kind of validated that the second and third week in March is a high injury time, early June, and then early August, where, guys are getting bigger, they're stronger, the innings are starting to mount up. Then the wear and tear during the season starts to, kind of expose them.
Yeah, and on that same note, Jamie, is there something you guys as an athletic training and sports medicine staff are doing in terms of communication or tracking in the off season to ensure, a guy doesn't go back and he's just chasing velo and doing more damage when he's not under your supervision? Is there anything you're doing tracking or communication wise to ensure that doesn't happen leading into spring training?
Yeah, we as the Rangers sat down, 5 or 6, 7 years ago, and just looked at our injury data, and our pitchers were getting hurt just like everybody other team's pitchers were getting hurt. And we kind of modified our throwing program. That's been very successful. But we also do a lot more pitchers camps. So we have one in January in Arizona. Sometimes we used to have one in December for the minor league guys, but that's now the quote unquote dead period where pitchers are on their own and they can't really work out with clubs. And so we kind of monitor say in our January program, which will be next week, we kind of monitor where the pitchers are and then kind of put a program going forward between, next week and when they show up in spring training. So we have a better handle on what they can expect, and more importantly, what our pitching coaches can expect when they show up in spring training. So you do as well as you can, but these guys all spread out around the country and, Latin America. And so it's harder than you would think to truly monitor, what do we have? Probably 100 pitchers in our organization to monitor all those guys.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I recently had Chris McDonald of the Tigers on, and he was talking about heading down to Puerto Rico and different trips he's taking, which really, lends itself to not having any off season for an athletic trainer because he's trying to, keep tabs on as many guys as he can who are rehabbing. Well, Jamie, one thing, we've talked about a number of times in discussion is youth arm health. And I know you're so passionate about it. And as a parent yourself and myself, it's very interesting to hear how we can kind of reduce these injuries and what's actually going on. One of the most compelling data points that I found from the report was the number of players to throw 95 or more miles an hour at a perfect game showcase in 2014 was 5. In 2024, 36 players at perfect game showcases, their velocity was over 95 miles an hour. Talk about this just seemingly insane stat, how we've gotten to this point, and also what we can do to slow that down, if anything.
Well, you're exactly right. And honestly, that number did not surprise me. And recognize these showcases for what they are. They're huge moneymakers for the companies, the groups that put them together. Yep. But it's also a chance for an amateur player to get in front of 30 teams of scouts and show off their stuff. And whether it enhances their college situation, a high school player going into college, or whether it enhances their draft position, whether it's a high school or college player, is certainly real and translates to a lot of money, millions of dollars. So, you understand the motivation, but I think understanding the motivation, the money, but taking a step back and looking at the other things, it's interesting, Sam. I've been given the impact that youth baseball has on Major League Baseball talk for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And 20 years ago, when I gave my talks, and I would show that this sports specific year round baseball, these off-season pitching coaches, radar guns, weighted balls, long toss programs, throwing sliders too early. When I first started giving that talk 20 years ago, the coaches didn't want to hear it, and the parents were taking notes and had a million questions. Now the parents don't even want to hear it. They don't want to hear that they're possibly, endangering their child's health, pitching health, because they're pushing them so hard with, whether it's in a weight room, whether it's supplements, whether it's a year-round pitching coach, the weighted balls that come with it, and certainly the radar gun, which translates to velocity, which translates to money and stat and draft status. So it didn't surprise me at all to see those numbers. And it certainly correlates with why, in the last 10 or 12 years, the number of Tommy John UCL reconstructions in minor leagues has more than tripled, because we're basically inheriting a lot of damaged elbows and shoulders.
Yeah, and for anyone that hasn't seen Jamie's presentation, we'll share this on our website or in the show notes. But one of the most mind-blowing parts of that presentation, Jamie, that I've seen a number of times now is you kind of show a map of the country. And you talked about how back in the day, drafting somebody from Wisconsin, where I'm from, or Minnesota, or Canada, or up north, you usually were more safe in terms of damage to the elbow and the shoulder. That isn't the case anymore. Can you share a bit of info on that? I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, it was actually a Sports Illustrated issue at the end of the year in 2009, and actually Keith Meister, my team physician, showed it to me, and it was one of those wrap up sports end of the year issues, and it showed where like the NASCAR drivers from the country where they developed, and obviously mostly from the South, some on the West Coast, but it turned to Major League Baseball, and it showed where the most home run hitters, where they had come from. And it was a circle that started yellow, and the deeper red it got, yeah, more home runs, starting with 200 Major League home runs, 300, 400, 500, 600, and 700 home runs. And not surprisingly, most of those hitters were developed in southern states. And you think about that and say, okay, you turn the page, and in shades of green, it shows where Major League pitchers have won 100 games, 150, 200, 250, 300 games, 400 games, and they were mostly from the North. And you think about that for a little bit, and then I kind of came up with this phrase that those pitchers were weather protected up north. And while those hitters down south could literally take batting practice year round or close to it, and get a lot of swings, and it's not really injury-wise detrimental, maybe to the lumbar spine, but it's not detrimental. But these pitchers up north were weather protected. So, when it got cold, they played soccer or football in the fall, and they played basketball in the winter, and then they went back out to baseball in February or March when it started to warm up. So those kids were protected. But interestingly, as I followed my dad in doing the draft the last 15 years, I would say about 10 or 12 years ago, all of a sudden, especially in the bigger cities, Boston, New York, Chicago, Seattle especially, all of a sudden you started seeing a lot more elbow injuries in amateur pitchers in those cities. And you started to realize that these were those baseball warehouses that allowed those baseball players to train year round. They'd go inside and they'd continue to throw off the mound, and they'd have a pitching coach. And then, the weighted balls came along, and then all of a sudden all these facilities, have a radar gun and analytic displays. And now all of a sudden you're chasing the stuff and the velocity. And again, I really believe that we're inheriting so many damaged players when we draft them into professional baseball that starts when these kids are 10 and 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And it's really had a huge impact. And, it used to be where when kids went to the Little League World Series, 12-year-olds, the best in the world, they could throw 10 times their age. So a 12-year-old could throw 120 pitches, which Major League pitchers don't throw 120 pitches anymore. And Dr. Andrews, who was a forefather in sports medicine and baseball, and brilliant guy and very, proactive in protecting the players, he and his group USA Baseball got it lowered to 7 times their age. But a lot of people ask me, I have a son who's really good, and Keith Meister and I talked about this a lot. If it's my son, I'm not going more than 5 times his age, because remember, a 12-year-old throwing 60 pitches, that's more than most relievers ever throw in a major league game. Sure. Second off, it's not just 60 pitches in the game. Then they're 8 warm-up pitches for those 4 or 5 innings. So that adds another 30 or 40 pitches on. And then it's the bullpen getting loose, and that throws another 20 or 30 on. And if they're doing that multiple times a week, that's more workload than a skeletally mature, highly trained major league pitchers throwing in a week. So it's the onus for me is on the parents to protect their kids, to give them the best chance to go in, start their professional career in baseball healthy. And that's really, you can have a lot of things, but nothing replaces health.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Dr. Andrews, another stat in the report from the Andrews Sports Medicine Institute. Just like you mentioned, it cited that the percentage of UCL surgeries coming from youth or high school players has risen from 10% to 40% at his institute since 95. Players drafted with UCL injury history has grown from under 5 in 05 to now 35 in 2024. What do you make of these stats? And also, you're so involved in the draft with the Rangers. Is this changing how you approach the draft?
It certainly is for me, because there's a factor there. That there was a time when the average major league pitcher's age was about 27 or 28 before he had his first Tommy John. And what we did really appreciate at that time was these guys retired when they were 32 or 33. Some made it to maybe 35 or 36.
Sure.
And they retired before that graft. And the graft is essentially a tendon that's taken out of either your forearm or your leg and goes in to replace the damaged ligament. It's woven in and it becomes a graft. And just a little anatomical lesson, a ligament holds bone to bone. So all your joints are stabilized by ligaments. And that's why in the elbow, this ulnar collateral ligament receives so much stress. You take the tendon out and it basically replaces the ligament and becomes a graft. What we didn't appreciate, I think, was how long these grafts would last. And these guys were retiring at 34 or 35 before the graft really had that much mileage on it. But now what we're seeing is, the graft lifespan might be 5 to 8 years, especially with enhanced velocity. And the success rate of a Tommy John surgery goes from about 90% on the first TJ to 55% on the second TJ. And
Wow.
what do we want to think about on the third TJ? So if you're having a Tommy John surgery at 16 and that graft wears out, say 8 years later at 24, and you're having your second TJ, now it becomes much more of a risk. And you ask how the impact in the draft room is. It wasn't that long ago where, my scouting director would think, okay, he's already had his Tommy John. He got that out of the way. And parents would actually, ask doctors, can you do a TJ on my son's elbow so that he gets that out of the way? He can go forward with his college and professional career. But now, if it's a fresh TJ by a reputable surgeon, they're lower risk. They're not no risk. It's probably a moderate risk. Whereas I used to have a higher risk on them. But now we have to factor in, okay, where's this guy going to be in 6 years or 8 years? And now he's in the major leagues and you're going to miss, 14 months, 15 months, whatever the time frame is. And usually you go a little slower on the TJ. That's a huge impact on the players, on the team's roster and 40-man and IL days and certainly budget salary-wise. So it has a huge impact. So yeah, these youth TJs are certainly, rising at an incredible rate, and reconstructions are certainly rising just as quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. As a professional, you noted that it's not a one-time thing. Like let's get this Tommy John out of the way, and then we're going to be healed up for good. The wear and tear is going to continue, and I think that's something super important for parents to know who aren't in the profession, who don't have access to guys like you to talk about. Well, Jamie, I want to talk about another aspect of technology, data, and tracking. We know that's improved so much. You see these pitching warehouses, there's a radar gun and a big crowd, and people are trying to work their velocity up and improve their stuff. But it also has a positive impact on how you guys can track stuff at spring training and throughout the years, and just the video team, the access they have to data is incredible. Do you think it's having more of a negative impact in just the way younger players train, like you mentioned, at these pitching warehouses in the offseason?
It definitely has a negative impact, especially on their health. And, if you don't have health, then your college career is in jeopardy, and certainly your professional careers in jeopardy. And I'm all for staying in shape, staying in baseball shape and throwing. But I'm much more in favor of throw close to year round. Yeah, great. It's actually healthy for the ligament, but at lesser velos and the higher velocities and the data. There's immediate feedback. It used to be that pitchers got feedback from hitters, and they're not facing hitters in the offseason, so they really didn't have to ramp it up. But now they're getting feedback from all these analytical devices, and they're very accurate and very telling. And we have several of our major league pitchers who have their own that they use in the offseason. And we had a major league pitcher last year who actually, took one out for himself out into every bullpen he threw, so he could measure, his bullpens between starts at the major league level in season. So it's become very reliable data that pitchers use to their advantage. But, there's a time and place for that. And especially with the younger pitchers in the off season, I don't think it's the time.
And when you guys are kind of using that data and technology during spring training, ramping up, or, in June when you said injuries can occur, or toward the end of the year, what do you guys do to kind of measure the fatigue, and how do you notice, for those out there who are coming up in athletic training and trying to wrap their head around this, how do you even observe and notice that someone might be slowing down or someone might be having an issue if so many guys probably don't want to tell you because they either want to, stick on the 40 man or get paid more? How do you kind of manage that situation?
There are a lot of ways that we use a lot of workload data, and that starts sometimes in the weight room and conditioning. It also translates into the analytics on the mound. Long toss we'll look at, and we'll try to protect players, especially with pitch counts and that data over a series of collective starts. And we may skip a bullpen between starts. We may skip a start, which gives a pitcher 5 extra days, so a 10-day kind of rest. So there are a lot of ways that you can kind of measure workload. And every team has their own, system that they use. Mm-hmm. So it's what's good for the pitcher is what's good for the team. And if you can't keep them healthy, it's not good for either. So we certainly use a lot of tools, proprietary tools, and also a lot of commercially available tools to try to manage our pitchers' workloads and put them in the most successful plan to keep them healthy and pitching.
Yeah, all this has been super insightful, and we appreciate you sharing. Well, Jamie, I want to wrap up our talk about the report by giving you a second here to you shared so much information about your passion for youth arm health. What major pieces of advice would you share with parents or coaches or even youth players when it comes to, number one, sports specialization, learning how your body works in different sports, and becoming a better overall athlete, and also just taking care of the arm? We clearly are in an epidemic where people are not doing that enough. So what's your kind of final best piece of advice for those people out there?
This is an amazing report that is extremely telling. And, it was originally sent out this past December, just a month ago, and it was sent out mostly, I think, more exclusively to Major League Baseball people. Yeah. And I really feel like it's a report that should be shared to the entire baseball community. And I think we in Major League Baseball have the responsibility to educate everyone at the amateur level, parents, coaches, athletes, protect them. And so this is very valuable information that would protect them, keep them healthy so they enjoy baseball, whether it's a high school pitcher, a college pitcher, or a guy gets a chance to play at the big league level, or even just in professional baseball in general. So we should share this. And I think we owe it to the baseball community, Major League Baseball, to invest in, pitching seminars where we talk about mechanics and conditioning and arm care and throwing programs and use of analytics and throwing schedules throughout the year. There's a lot of information that we can share because we have firsthand knowledge that will protect these kids. A lot of sports have done that. And certainly in the NFL, they looked at knee braces on offensive linemen a long time ago, and they shared that information. And now most high school offensive and defensive linemen wear knee braces. Yeah. The rate of ACLs with those big guys has gone way, way down. So I think we owe it to the industry and to the community and for everyone who loves baseball. Even if you're just a fan, you want to see the best players out there. You want to see the best pitchers out there. And if they're getting hurt, you're not. So this is a ton of great information that MLB did a fantastic job with, and I'd love to see us share it with everyone who loves baseball and is involved in baseball really at any level.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Great points there. And we'll do our best to kind of get this out there. Obviously, sharing your insight on it with our audiences is a great way to start. Well, Jamie, to wrap up today's episode, I'm not sure if you're familiar or not, but we're going to finish with our usual quick Q&A segment. Super interested to hear your answers here with so much experience in the game. I'm going to ask you four quick questions and let you share some insight about your favorite things about athletic training. So we're going to kick it off here at first base. You've spent time in Tampa, Baltimore, Texas, and number of different athletic training rooms. What is your favorite athletic training room to work in the big leagues outside of your home spot at Texas?
I would say working with Richie Mancells in Baltimore. First off, I got to work in Memorial Stadium, which is the stadium I grew up in Annapolis. My dad would take me to Baltimore Colt and Baltimore Oriole games, and to be able to work there professionally was amazing. But to be able to work with Richie Mancells, he's like, honestly, he's like my big brother. He taught me so much, and not just the hands-on, the nuts and bolts of athletic training and protecting players, but just life in general and balancing family with a crazy baseball schedule. And he and I are still very, very dear friends. And that was probably my favorite time, especially when we opened Camden Yards and every game was sold out and we had very good competitive teams at that time. That was probably my favorite time in athletic training.
Mm-hmm. Awesome to hear that. Moving on to second base, you've had an amazing career. Like we mentioned, World Series champion with the Rangers a couple years ago. You've been in so many dugouts. I'm sure every dugout over the last couple decades. What's your favorite stadium to sit in the dugout and watch a game?
I think the one stadium that impressed me the most, or the dugout, was sitting in old, and I say old, I think it was the second generation of Yankee Stadium, and just knowing where you were and knowing the players that played on that field. It was definitely a wow factor. It's not a very comfortable dugout, but certainly at Fenway Park, if you appreciate the history of the game, and there's a tunnel, and it's literally a small tunnel that goes from the clubhouse down a bunch of steps, goes probably 100 feet forward, and then up a bunch of steps into the dugout. Mm-hmm. And you can't see the whole field from it. And we have 30 or 35 guys sitting in the dugout, and it's got room for about 16, so it's extremely crowded. But sitting certainly at Fenway Park was certainly really, really special. So certainly for me, who spent my entire career in the American League, it would be Boston, it'd be Fenway Stadium and Old Yankee Stadium.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of those cities, moving on to third base here, I know you might get out for a run in the morning or just walk around and, grab a cup of coffee and just take some time to refresh mentally, like many of your colleagues across the league. Do you have a favorite city to visit when you're on the road?
Yeah, I was a runner. I don't run as much anymore. Age has kind of caught my knees, but for me, that was the way to manage stress. And I would go over last night's injury report and I think about players coming in and, hey, are we missing something? Can we try something different? And, 45 minutes later, I had a great run and mentally I was able to walk through things. And certainly going out to Seattle, I love Safeco Field. Seattle's a great town. I love seafood. I love being near the water. And it was a stadium. I enjoy walking to the stadium in the late morning, again, just to kind of get my thoughts and ideas together. So certainly Seattle was probably my favorite. And also, leaving Texas at 100 degrees and go to Seattle in midsummer at 78 degrees was very nice also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. It's a common answer among your colleagues across the league that Seattle and Chicago are some of the best cities out there. Moving on to home plate, the last question for today. We have a lot of people starting maybe their first spring training or their first year in the big leagues this year. You're far from that time in your life. So when you broke into the game, or maybe, even in Tampa or Baltimore, or wherever that might be, did you ever have kind of a welcome to the big leagues moment at some point in your career?
Yeah, actually I did. And it was the Orioles had never had a family trip. And we had a rain out in Camden Yards. Every game was sold out. And so the Orioles, the players agreed to play a doubleheader, which no player likes playing a doubleheader, if we'd have a family trip. And it was very early in my career. And the wives were invited, and I always kind of felt my place that, hey, just like a player, I'm kind of a rookie. I'm low on the totem pole, and I would just, my team got to come on the trip, and I was like, hey, let's just lay low key. And I was on the plane, and Cal Ripken Sr. pulled me over, and he said, hey, you earned to be in the big leagues. You went through the minor leagues. You did a great job. You've come here. You've done a great job. Your wife deserves to enjoy this big league moment as much as you do. So let her enjoy it. And that was like, wow, I've really made it now when Rip Sr. says that to me. It was awesome. And, obviously I was making it very apparent, and it allowed my wife to have a better time than I was probably comfortable for either one of us having. And it was a real moment that I'll never forget.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you guys have obviously gone on a number of amazing trips throughout your career, but cool to see kind of where that started. Well, Jamie, really appreciate your time today, your dedication to PBATS, and sharing so much information about MLB's report on pitcher injuries, youth arm health. And we wish you and the staff in Texas nothing but the best as you approach spring training coming up here.
Thanks so much, Sam. I really enjoyed doing this, and I love being able to reach out and maybe help future Major League Baseball players.
Thank you for listening to the Inside Athletic Training Podcast. For more information about PBATS and athletic training, visit pbats.com. See you next time.